Okay, so today we are diving into the Data Sovereignty Act. And this isn't just, another one of those boring data
Right.
regulations. This thing is being called like the next GDPR.
Yeah. Not even just a successor GDPR on steroids?
Okay, I love that. GDPR and steroids. But just in case someone listening, this is like their first time hearing about data privacy,
Right.
you might be thinking, hold on, what even is GDPR?
Yeah, for anyone just joining the party, GDPR stands for the General Data Protection Regulation.
Okay.
And it basically set the rules about data privacy for people in the EU. So think
Yeah.
of it as the OG of data protection. But this new act, it might steal the show.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what makes this Data Sovereignty Act so different? The article that you sent me mentions broader applicability. What is that?
So GDPR, it had some loopholes. It was mostly focused on companies that handle data from people living in the EU.
Okay.
But this new act, it's saying every organization in that jurisdiction has to follow the rules.
Wow. So no more like dodging regulations for certain types of companies or industries. Everyone's on the same playing field.
Exactly, yeah,
That's a big deal.
it is. Think about it. If you're a consumer, this means way more consistent protection for your data, no matter who's handling it.
That's true.
But then on the flip side, for businesses, it might mean a lot more hoops to jump through, a lot more compliance measures.
Yeah. Okay. I see both sides there. So more consistency, obviously that's good, but there are always trade-offs with these things. What about this clearer definitions thing?
Oh, yeah.
I keep hearing about that.
That's another big one. So one of the big criticisms of GDPR was that some of the language was it was a little unclear.
Okay.
Like, for example, legitimate interest.
Okay, hold on, pause. Legitimate interest.
Yeah.
What is that?
So basically, it means a company can use your data without your consent
Okay.
if they have a really good reason, like if they're trying to prevent fraud.
Right.
But what counts as a legitimate interest?
Right.
That wasn't always super clear under GDPR.
Yeah.
So this new act is trying to make those definitions much more precise.
Okay, so less wiggle room.
Exactly.
Less like interpretation.
Exactly.
So
Yeah,
less confusion, hopefully fewer loopholes for companies to exploit.
exactly. And speaking of loopholes, the article also really emphasizes how much stronger the enforcement mechanisms are under this new Data Sovereignty Act.
Yeah.
So GDPR had those huge fines,
Right. Right.
but they weren't always consistently enforced.
Okay, so more bite than bark this time around.
Exactly. Yeah.
I like it. So stricter enforcement, clearer rules. Anything else that makes this new act a bigger deal than GDPR?
Well, there's this whole thing about explicit consent.
Okay.
GDPR kind of touched on it a little bit, but this new act really goes all in. It demands a clear yes from users
Hmm.
before anything is collected or processed. No more assuming it's okay just because, I don't know, they signed up for your email list or visited your website.
Yeah.
A much stricter standard.
Wow. Okay, so that changes things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's a big shift in how companies would have to approach data collection in the first place. What kind of impact do you think this would have on businesses that rely a lot on things like data analytics or targeted advertising? I mean, that's got to be a game changer for them.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it could completely disrupt their current business models. Like, imagine a world where every single piece of data that's used for targeted advertising requires explicit informed consent.
Yeah, it's a completely different world.
That's huge.
And what about for just everyday people?
Yeah.
What would be the most important ways that this act would empower them when it comes to, controlling their data?
Well, the article highlights a few things,
Mm-hmm.
but I think the biggest one is this idea of robust private right of action. It sounds a little intimidating, I know.
Okay, yeah.
Well, I can break it down.
Yeah, please break it down.
Basically, it means that if a company mishandles your data under this act, you have a much more direct way to take legal action against them. You don't have to wait around for a government agency or something.
Right.
You can seek justice yourself.
Wow. Okay, so it's like the Wild West, but in a good way,
Yeah, exactly. Kind of. Yeah,
where you've got a little bit more control, a little bit more power.
exactly. Yeah, it's definitely a power shift.
Yeah.
And that's just one example of how the Data Sovereignty Act is really trying to empower individuals. And it also significantly expands on the rights that were first introduced under GDPR.
Like what?
What other rights are we talking about?
Yeah, give me the rundown.
Well, so you know how GDPR gave people the right to access their data, to
Mhm.
correct it, or even delete it?
Yeah.
The Data Sovereignty Act takes all those rights even further. Like, it makes it really clear that there can't be any random limitations or restrictions.
No arbitrary limitations. So it's not just about like having these rights in theory,
Right.
it's about actually being able to use them.
Exactly. It's all about giving people more control, more autonomy over their data. And actually, that reminds me, remember how we talked about GDPR having some exemptions for certain industries?
Yeah, like how some industries didn't really have to follow all the same rule.
Exactly. Well, this new act, it's like, nope, to all that.
Okay.
It wants to even the playing field so that every it doesn't matter if you're, a social media giant or a government agency, everyone has to follow the same data protection standards.
Okay, so I'm sensing a theme here. Stronger rights for individuals, tougher rules for organizations, and like no more getting out of it for anyone. It sounds like they're really tightening the screws with this Data Sovereignty Act.
Yeah, absolutely. They're trying to address all the weaknesses that people found in the old data privacy laws.
Hmm.
And, one of the things I find super interesting is this big emphasis on transparency.
Oh, yeah, the article mentioned that too. But
Yeah.
isn't that already like a big part of data privacy laws? I mean, companies already have to have those privacy policies, right?
They do, yeah. But let's be real. How often do you actually read those things? All those pages and pages of legal jargon.
Never. It's like it's written in a different language.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem. This Data Sovereignty Act, it wants to take transparency to a whole new level. It's not just about disclosing what data is collected. It's about explaining it in a way that actually makes sense to, normal people.
Oh, okay. So no more hiding behind all that confusing legal language.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a welcome change.
Absolutely. And you know what's crazy?
Right.
The article argues that being this transparent could actually lead to more innovation.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Because I always thought more regulations meant less innovation. Like, how does that work?
Okay, so think of it this way. Right now, there's a ton of uncertainty around data privacy, right?
Yeah.
Companies are always walking on eggshells, worried about getting penalized.
Hmm.
But if they had crystal clear guidelines, then they could innovate freely within those boundaries. They'd know exactly what's allowed, what's not, no more gray areas.
Okay, so it's like if the rules are super clear, it actually makes businesses more creative because they can be more confident about like pushing the boundaries.
Exactly. It's about creating a framework that encourages innovation, but in a responsible way. Oh, and another thing. The Data Sovereignty Act doesn't just stop at data processing like GDPR did. It also wants to regulate data sharing, even data selling.
Whoa, I didn't even think about that. So it's closing those loopholes where a company might share or sell your data, even if they weren't the ones like processing it themselves.
Precisely. It shows how dedicated this act is to giving individuals more control over how their data is used, shared, bought, and sold.
This is honestly blowing my mind, but I have to admit it's a lot to take in.
Yeah,
We've talked about broader applicability, clearer definitions, stricter enforcement, explicit consent, more consumer rights, no industry exemptions, this big focus on transparency. Did we miss anything?
you pretty much nailed it. You even highlighted how this new approach to transparency could actually boost innovation.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
You're on a roll.
Okay.
But there's one last point from the article we should probably touch on.
Oh, yeah. It was something about how the Data Sovereignty Act takes a broader approach to how data is used than GDPR did.
Right. So GDPR, it was mostly about data processing, but this new act, it widens the scope to include stuff like data sharing, even data selling. Basically, it knows that these days data goes everywhere and it wants to make sure you have a say in all of it.
Okay, that makes sense. Like closing those loopholes where companies might share or sell your data, even if under GDPR they were technically in the clear. Right. So to recap, the Data Sovereignty Act is poised to be a game changer for every aspect of data privacy. Broader applicability, clearer definitions, stricter enforcement, explicit consent, more rights for consumers, no exemptions for any industries, a huge focus on transparency, and a more well-rounded approach to how data is used in general. Did I get it all?
You got it.
Mm.
We really covered it all today. It's obvious that this Data Sovereignty Act isn't just some, small update. It's pushing for a huge shift in how we think about and deal with data privacy.
It kind of feels like we're about to enter a whole new era of the internet, one where data privacy isn't just some afterthought, but like a core principle, you know?
Totally. And honestly, I think that's the most important thing for our listeners to take away from today. This Data Sovereignty Act, if it passes, it could be a huge turning point in the evolution of data privacy. It makes you wonder, how will companies have to change? How will technology have to change? What will it even mean for, our digital lives going forward.
Yeah, that's a lot to think about. But this deep dive has given us a lot to consider about how big of an impact this act could have.
Totally. And you know what? Something tells me this conversation is far from over. As this Data Sovereignty Act, moves forward, we'll be watching closely to see how it changes data privacy.
There you have it, your deep dive into the Data Sovereignty Act, everybody. We explored some arguments for why it's being called a potential game changer for data privacy. Now it's your turn. What do you think about this new act? Head over to our website and let us know. We want to hear from you. Until next time, keep learning and keep asking those important questions.